Welcome, everyone. This is the February meeting of the East Norwalk Neighborhood Association. My name is Diane Cece. The agenda for this evening, as you might already realize, is we're going to be talking about the Cemetery Street Mill Pond development, the special permit application that is in progress right now and has the public hearing scheduled for Thursday, March 2nd, which is a week from this Thursday. Our next regular meeting would be March 20th, but I am allotting some time for this coming Monday, the 28th, if we feel like we want to get back together as a group and do some preparation via Zoom for the upcoming public hearing. But what you can expect is that there'll be a lot of emails coming from ENNA over the next week. And I know that sometimes you feel inundated by them, but it's important that we communicate as much information as we can and as quickly as we can. Okay, so just a few things I want to go through. First of all, the public hearing for the Cemetery Street application is at 6 o'clock on Thursday, the 2nd. And we have, asked, and we haven't had a response that I've seen yet in terms of moving that out a little bit later, and in consideration of the fact that people are still working or commuting or feeding their children, and it's an early hour to have that. We'd rather start a little bit later so that people can participate right from the beginning, even if it means that they would have to hold open the public hearing to another night. If it seems to be getting particularly late. The meeting itself is going to be, I'm kind of describing it as a hybrid for lack of a better term. It's going to be both Zoom and in person, but not the way that we intended it. What we were hoping to do was to be able to make sure that all of the planning and zoning commissioners would be at City Hall. They typically meet in the Common Council chambers, and that it would be just the residents who would have the option of either being on Zoom and participating from home or their office, or going over to City Hall and participating in the public hearing in person, just like we used to do before COVID. But apparently their interpretation of it is basically the hybrid they've been doing, which is that the P&Z commissioners, as of at least yesterday, have an option to stay at home or to appear in person at City Hall. And you'll see in, I think that one of the last emails we sent that we're urging all of you to continue to write into the P&Z Commission and P&Z Director Steve Kleppen and Mayor Harry Rilling and urge them to require the full commission to appear in person, even if it means that it has to be in a bigger room than the chambers for people's comfort level in terms of the number of people in proximity. And what it means for residents, though, is that you can you're going to be participating via Zoom. And it would be, you'd either be participating via Zoom from home or at City Hall in the council chambers, but with a microphone and a camera and a laptop that would be provided. So it is not exactly what we intended, and we don't have a lot of time left, but we're hoping to change that. Okay, just really quickly, just a reminder, this is just one shot here of the proposed development. This is the front that you see from Cemetery Street. There's a rather large structure that really takes up the bulk of the property. It's all connected, but in different styles. Over to the left that you don't see here is another smaller structure that would be on the bend around the corner at Gregory Boulevard. The architect rendering of conceptually what this would look like is one I think that most of you guys have seen before. It shows you East Avenue coming south and then bending around to Cemetery Street. Their rendition of what these buildings might look like, we understand, with similar materials and colors. And of course, the historic cemetery here which they actually portray more as a park. And they refer to it as the green. So, okay. And then just quickly, I want to highlight one of the most controversial aspects of this development, besides the actual structures and layout and number of units, et cetera, and the impact on the pond, is that one of the most important things that this project is contingent upon is the modification of Cemetery Street and the actual traffic pattern. And everything that I'm going to show you in terms of this diagram is online, and we can go back and forth between the planning and zoning site as we need to if people have specific questions. The first thing to know is that the city and the developer are working together and have gone to the DOT and asked that Cemetery Street, which is now a 2-lane, one-way portion of State Road 136, to convert that into a single lane of traffic, one way, and then add on-street parking in front of the facilities, the structures, and also a buffer area and a bike zone, in addition to what we think was already part of a separate plan to expand and provide sidewalks that go around the cemetery so that pedestrians can walk around the entire area of the cemetery and have a sidewalk. Part of this is required because they're looking to provide parking spaces that are off-site of their property so that they can maximize the number of residential units and move those out to the street. It's our understanding that these would be transitional parking and would be paid parking. It would actually modify the traffic pattern so that the left turn from Cemetery Street going northbound on Gregory, and it's hard to see here because they have all of these overlays of the street here, but that lane would turn left onto Gregory going northbound and would no longer have the yield that you're all familiar with at the traffic triangle there. Instead, when they go to modify this, the traffic coming from Gregory Boulevard going northbound would end up with the yield and have to yield to the oncoming traffic from Cemetery Street. And we can come back and talk about this a little bit more, but I wanted to highlight it because it's a significant portion of what's being changed. And although the city will, look to make, have people believe that this is something that was in the works from a safety point of view, the bottom line is that this is being considered only because of this particular application. And it's likely that if the state DOT doesn't approve this, that there would have to be changes to this development plan because they only have one curb cut, and it served as the only entrance and exit out of the property, which is where near the existing curb cut is. And some of you may be familiar with that because it's also the area that they couldn't have built in anyway, because this grayed out area you see here is a massive stormwater pipe system that runs underneath that parcel. Okay, so just want to remind folks again that some important things that we want you to keep in mind is that this, what allows this development to even be proposed is what was called the Transit-Oriented Development Plan for East Norwalk. It was created specifically to spur high-density residential development around train stations, and not just here. It is a national tool that's used for that purpose. And a TOD in East Norwalk was adopted by the city in 2020. Following the adoption of transit-oriented development, actual zoning regulations that were specific for the East Avenue corridor were developed, and it dictates the pipe and size and use and scale of development from I-95 to Cemetery Street, and some of the side streets along the way as well. The East Avenue Village Transit Zone, which you'll hear us refer to now as EVTZ, was adopted in 2021. And that's where you'll sometimes hear us say that the ship has sailed in terms of modifying the zoning. Within that EVTZ district, there is an increased height over what we would normally see, from 2.5 stories to 3.5 stories, and a population density that allows for as much as 1 residential unit per every 800 square feet of lot area, which is roughly double what the zone was prior to these changes. Okay, so the zone itself is allowed in terms of development proposals coming in, and is dictated by 2 criteria. One, that an application that comes in would fall under a special permit review based on the number of units that they're looking to put on one of these parcels. And then they can also apply for public amenity bonus points that allow them to achieve the greatest height and the greatest density within the parcel. The zone also typically will require, as did this one, this is the first application, a third-party traffic review and also a design review, which takes into account architectural design and landscape design. The important thing to keep in mind is that if the special permit application itself complies with the zoning regulations and there's no technical flaws, then generally the P&Z Commission, first of all, they must review it. They can't refuse to hear the actual application. They have to schedule at least 1 public hearing because it is a special permit. And again, because it's a special permit, they have to take into consideration 13 standards that are specific to special permits and allow them to evaluate the impact on the community. And that's different from any other type of permit, which is basically called as of right, where if it meets the technical requirements, then the zoning commission can't deny the application. In the case of a special permit, if they determine that these 13 standards would have a negative impact on the community that conditions can't mitigate, then it gives them the right to legally deny the application. And in this case, they also have the benefit or the responsibility, I should say, of having to judge the benefits of the public amenity bonus points that the developer is suggesting, and see if those points are significant enough in terms of the benefit to the public to grant this amount of height and density. And regardless, the zoning commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, can impose conditions under which an otherwise objectionable permit would be granted. Whoops. I just want to speak to that. So in this case, the most obvious one would be that this particular application would on the surface have all kinds of traffic implications with it. But the zoning commission can actually say that they would be approving this application with the condition that the state DOT actually approve the changes to Route 136. So that's an example of where they can impose a condition to either remove or mitigate a potentially negative condition, a standard in the community. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of these. I think we did this at our last meeting, but I wanted you to see that none of these things fluctuate. It's not a moving target on what they're looking at. Specifically, the Planning and Zoning Commission will be looking to see whether or not this application complies with 13, I don't know that we have all of them up here, but it's 12 or 13 specific considerations. And these are the ones that they'll be looking at. Density of use, the traffic flow, availability of mass transit, compatibility with utilities, the adverse impact from noise, odor, fumes, dust, and artificial lighting. Signs don't really come into play yet until further down the road. The adequacy of the yards and open space, the screening and buffering, the impact on neighborhood properties as compared to uses and structures that are permitted other than the one that's going in as of right. The existing land use in the area, proximity of community facilities, whether or not it complies with zoning code and the POCD, which is our master plan, and the conservation of wetlands, watercourses, and other ecological valuable lands. Okay, so I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about those conditions, and then we'll open things up for the chat and questions. So if you've been following our emails, you'll see that we've been referring to, for probably a month now, what we call a toolkit. And in this case, it's our Scale It Back toolkit, which is a number of different items and methods that we use where the public can participate by choosing all or some of these items to whatever your comfort level is, for you to be able to share your position on this application. As you know, ENNA and the on behalf of the community is objecting to this application. So everything is geared towards asking the city to refer this back to the developer and scale it back. And just to go back again once more to say, the reason why to scale it back and not necessarily deny it is because we recognize that this particular application could meet all of the technical requirements of the zone. In fact, there are portions of the zoning regulations that appear to have been written specifically for this parcel and for this development. So rather than go down an effort and futility to have the entire thing denied, it just doesn't make sense. It's more reasonable then to go back and say it really needs to be modified and scaled back to a great extent. The toolkit, and we'll get to raise hands in just a minute, I promise. The toolkit, first of all, was a lawn sign, which we use for just building community awareness and some messaging around this. And thank you to everyone who came by and picked up a lawn sign. I think we have literally a handful left. If you haven't picked up your lawn sign, just email and we'll see how many we have left. And I do want to say again that if you picked up a lawn sign and you didn't email me, Diane, into info@eastnorwalk.org, if you can please do that, because we need to make sure that we know where the lawn signs are and also account for all the ones that people have reserved. Also in the toolkit, there are some things that are still in draft form. And a lot of that has to do with the fluidity of this application. You've heard us already express complaints into the zoning department that they scheduled a public hearing ahead of having all of the official documents and analysis available to the public. And that's not really nice. And it did make this thing a bit of a moving target for us. As of today, we're still missing a couple of significant pieces, not the least of which is the final version of the design and architectural and landscape review. So, but in the meantime, we have some things that are in draft form. One is kind of a one-pager fact sheet about this project, so that it'll be easy for people to communicate with your neighbors and also for you to understand and refer people to it on our website when we get it posted up there. And we'll also have it out in email form. Another thing in the toolkit is for people to write letters to editors and local blogs. And that has been ongoing. We would like to see some more of that, but we also recognize, actually, this has been an ongoing problem, that there seems to be a significant issue with getting the Norwalk Hour to publish our letters. And it's been an uphill battle, and I've been working with one of the editors on that as well from Hearst. Another powerful tool is emails and letters into City Hall. And we do recommend that you send that into both the planning and zoning staff, ask them to forward it on to the commission, and also to your elected officials. I'll answer a question now too that we get all the time is why can't I write directly to the planning and zoning commissioners? And because of the legalities and statutory guidelines that they operate under, especially once a public hearing has either been announced or is in progress, all communication has to go through staff to them, so that they're assured that every commissioner has all the same information, versus hearing from different residents. And so what's become the protocol in Norwalk is, rather than sometimes be able to communicate with them and then not during public hearings and appeals, the protocol is that all communication goes into city staff, Steve Kleppen and his department, and then they funnel that on to the planning and zoning commissioners. Another thing that people may not be aware of is that all communication you send in regarding this application is actually shared with the applicant. So it gets scanned and it's sent over to them. Okay, the next big thing that's in draft is the sample scale it back letter for the actual hearing. So we're still encouraging people to send emails and letters into City Hall and the Commission all along, expressing your concerns, asking them to delay the hearing. We've asked them to do a height test for us so that people can visualize the scale of what these buildings are going to be. So all of that type of communication should be ongoing. And then the written communication regarding the application itself will be this sample letter that we'll be providing for you. Of course, you're welcome to write your own emails and letters. And when we do send you the sample letter, we do ask that you modify it to what your own concerns and suggestions are. And we do ask that you personalize it in a manner, because the commissioners are going to want to see, if you've lived here for 50 years, how close you live to the parcel, what the direct impact might be on you and your family, or possibly your livelihood. The online petition is about 99% done. It's another powerful tool that we have. That is going to go live, and the link will be provided this week. And we share that all over, not only with our emails, but also on social media. And we hope to have a great response to that as well. The actual modification request that we're asking for is in final draft. Again, some of this has been a moving target. So we want to make sure that we know exactly what this application is that's going to be before the zoning commission, and then make sure that our modifications are in line, or modification requests are in line with that. Many of you have asked and then also offered to participate and help organize a possible on-site sidewalk demonstration. We did 2 of these when we were opposing the Norden warehouse distribution facility. And we think they were very effective. And even though the time clock is ticking on this one too, we think that there's a possibility to do that this weekend. We are assuming at this point that despite our best efforts and all the letters and work that you folks have done, that the city doesn't have any intention at this point of delaying the public hearing. And then finally, also the suggestion of something that we don't typically do is to just kind of send the message here that really the buck stops at City Hall, regardless of whether or not this is a zoning issue, and that this is an election year, and that folks may want to send the message that East Norwalkers do not have a short memory in terms of the quality of life and the impact on our community. Okay, just so folks can see what we were talking about with public amenity bonus points. Steve Kleppen and his staff and the consultants and the developers developed a kind of an a la carte menu of different types of public amenities that could be included in a project that would then get them to different levels of height and density that they would be allowed to build. In this particular case, what we have here, and this will be in the toolkit and also in the fact sheet, so you don't have to write all these down. This is exactly what Mill Pond Holdings, the developers, are suggesting for the public amenities. You'll also would have seen these in the documents that are on the city website and the ones that we've emailed out to you. And we can come back to any of these with questions as well. Okay, another thing that I wanted to share with you is just an example of what the sample letter would look like. It's going to go to the zoning commissioners. We always ask that you be professional and respectful, and just address them in a manner that we're urging them or requesting them to consider concerns and to also consider modifications. What we're doing with this letter is we're literally going to be listing all 13 of the or all of the special permit standards that apply to this particular application. And we'll also define what our interpretation of it is and what the concern is. And then you'll be able to pick and choose for yourself which ones are concerns that you personally have. It could be all of them, it could be one of them, it could be a handful of them. And then ultimately what you'll be doing is requesting that the project be scaled back in the height, the density, and also the parcel layout. And then move on to what's going to be the list of the modifications. Just wanted to remind people again that 77 units, but it does have over 130 bedrooms, and there are components of it that are retail and office space. And we can just flip through a few of these quickly, but these are all online. These are now the kind of fancy renditions of what some of the amenities will look like. We can go back to any of that, and I can also bring up the city website page. Everything that we should need to have to be able to analyze and understand this development and then be able to speak to it is supposed to be on the city website. So you can go to the website and take a look at everything that's there. And then, we'd be happy to help with answering any questions about what you're looking at, because it can be very confusing.
Hey, Diana, do you want to go to what you're doing next? Or I see we have a hand raised from Alex Knott.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and go into some questions and things, because I'm sure people have some questions at this point, and then we can talk about what's going to happen over the next 7 days, which is really all geared around the toolkit, and then coming back in to talk about some guidance that we're going to give you for the public hearing. I can also tell you that we're in the process of 2 other things. We're looking to possibly engage with a land use consultant who's an expert in doing some of the analysis that we've been struggling to do on our own. And so we're hopeful that we'll be able to pursue that. That will also possibly, and I think that former Mayor Knott may be able to answer and help me with this, that will also potentially lead to the type of things that we'll be pointing out in the public hearing and in our analysis that could be the potential ground for an appeal should this application get approved, either without condition or in a manner that we still object to. So those things are happening as we speak. We do have, I'm not going to name anyone, obviously, but it's ENNA as an organization wouldn't have what's called legal standing in terms of intervening in this matter from a legal point of view or the appeal. But abutting neighbors and people who are most impacted if this development were to go through do have legal standing. And we are grateful to know that at least at this point, we have we have two residents who are willing to step in and be named as interveners so that they can that can proceed. Okay, so we have former Mayor Alex Knopp. It's so nice to see you and welcome.
Thank you.
To
It's
the
nice to be
ENNA
here.
meeting.
Good. I first want to congratulate Diane and you and everyone. I think you've done an excellent job of preparation. I tried to email you to get a lawn sign and the email didn't go through. So
Oh,
I hope you'll check the site to make sure you're getting your traffic and you'll save me a sign.
I'll be certain that you get a sign.
Thank you. I just wanted to be clear in terms of, and maybe we didn't see the last slide there about the modification request that we'll be making in terms of the reduction in the number of units and its relationship to the bonus points. Is it the fact that if the bonus points were not awarded, that there would be 77 units as the minimum as a matter of right? I was unclear from the presentation.
Right, so there would so it's kind of a combination of things, and an important component of that is the compilation of those bonus points. So there are basically, as I recall, there are two different levels in the bonus points that they can achieve. And I believe where they're at right now, if those bonus points were not awarded, then they couldn't do that number of units. It would be scaled back to I'm not sure if it, what it would be per square foot. But that's a good question, and we need to take a look at that, because the maximum is 1 per 825 square feet, but they couldn't have fit that on the parcel anyway because of the maximum coverage on the lot. And then the minimum would have been the regular standard of 1 unit for every 1,625 square feet on the parcel. But they couldn't have maxed out to the max out points anyway, because the parcel size and the pond and relative to the curb cut wouldn't allow it, and the easement that comes through.
Well, I think that would be a helpful number to get, because
yes, very
knowing what the matter of right number of units is gives us a better gauge on what to be seeking in terms of a modification. It seems to me, most, if not all, of the bonus considerations are very loosey-goosey and generally for the benefit not of the public but for the residents, and to me is a kind of a weak point in the application. So I think focusing a bit on that would be helpful, because it's more of an objective result than it is a subjective. We want less and they want more. If we attack those bonus as not really being a public benefit to East Norwalk, and given the burden of this development for traffic and other things, I think that's something I would feel very comfortable knowing and operating off of. But again, thank you, Dan. I think you've done an excellent job of organizing and getting information out, and I'm glad to help. I think you were very effective on the Norton site truck depot. I was glad to help with that, and I hope we have the same impact. And finally, could I ask, has anybody tried to communicate with the developers about opportunities to negotiate something different?
I'm not sure. There actually may be a couple of members of the public who are most impacted by this development, who've been in communication with them lately. We were in communication with them obviously very early on. In fact, with Mike DeScala, who was the long-term owner of that parcel. This was not a new sale of that parcel, just so people understand that. He has owned that parcel, I believe, for decades at this point. Prior STOD was being developed. We were in communication knowing that this was a prime parcel. And then as we approached the passage of the EVTZ zone, we continued, and we were promised a number of different things that didn't materialize. So therefore it didn't seem prudent to spend our time going back to have that discussion. The other thing that happened with that too, Alex, just so that you're aware, is that all of the original discussions and presentations with ENNA and my own personal meetings with Mike Piscala were originally only as him as a developer. It was sprung on us at the last minute that he had partnered with Spinnaker to do this partnership. And just by way of a little bit of history for folks, Spinnaker is a developer who put up the Brim and Crown at the train station. And we had a similar experience in trying to negotiate early on with that as well, to no avail. And completely, I would say, and I don't mind saying this in public because it's true and many people were there and experienced it, disrespectful, dismissive, and complete disregard for the public. And so to answer your question, it did yes at one point, and no today.
Okay, let me just say as my final comment, and I appreciate having a chance to ask these questions. I have a very good personal relationship with both Mike Piscala and Spinnaker from things we did together when I was mayor that have turned out very positively. I would never contact them without the authorization of this group, but if at some point you wanted some outreach, I'd be glad to volunteer, but I wouldn't do it without everybody's consent.
I think, I think, first of all, that's a very generous offer, and thank you very much. And I think most people would be agreeable to that, because one of the things that we're looking for in the modification is for the Planning and Zoning Commission to kind of bring it back to them. But one version that we have written is for the city to facilitate a meeting where we can come back together. But it would be something that, that the city would have to be involved with, I would think, at this point. But I appreciate the offer. And I think, if we just show like a show of hands or nodding heads for people we see, I would think that the sense is that we, at this point, I don't know that it can hurt. And it may have some benefit, especially, coming from you, being willing to facilitate it. Yep, I'm seeing lots of thumbs up and head shaking. So
why don't we discuss afterward?
Okay.
What the ask would be? It could be asked to come back to the table, or could be an ask to accept all or part of the modification. But anyway, I just want to say I had to help out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. I'm not sure who's still co-hosting. It's either Sarah or Mary Ann. I'm not sure if you're keeping track of whose hands go up when, because it's just all.
I think we both are. Hang on. So I think right now you only have Diane Cano. Her hand is up.
You can unmute.
Yes. Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hi.
I'm Diane Cano. I live on Oldwell Court, so I'm very close to the property. I live on a short dead-end street behind the Masonic Lodge. So I will be the one viewing all the traffic jams, because I have two comments. I'm just putting out my comments. I haven't read through the whole plan, but I just can't quite imagine one lane of traffic heading towards the beach. It's 2 lanes now, and then they split off. One goes around the rotary and one's going to go off towards the beach if you're coming from the train station. So as I understand the plan you showed, it looks like they've reduced that to 1 lane of traffic coming around the rotary to allow for on-street parking. And that 1 lane will split to going towards the beach or around the rotary. Has that been approved? The question is, is that been approved by the state DOT? I think that's what you said the process was. So that, I don't think that's happened yet, but that's my question. That just seems to, if I ever parked my car there, I would just be saying, hey, just hit my car now, because I can't quite imagine that. And the traffic back and forth, back down to the beach on holidays and then summer would just, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, that's what our concern is there. So 2 things with that. The state, part of the delay with this application, because as you may recall, it was filed back in July. They ultimately, because the applicants are also under time clocks, they had to withdraw this application and reapply. in the late last year. And that was due mostly to the fact that the DOT was still is still evaluating that. So we've been in communication with the DOT, and it's kind of everyone pointing fingers at different departments. And for a long time, and even to today, we're not really clear on who specifically is asking for this. It ends up being that the applicants, and I think, Alex, you'll find this interesting. It's actually the applicants who filed the request for this, for the modification. But apparently they have the blessing of the city, including the transportation, mobility, and parking department. But as of, I will say last week, because I don't know what happened yesterday, it was still ongoing. Now, having said that, though, Diane, the DOT, I think, is only going to give like an overall approval of the concept, but then there would actually have to be what's called I think it's an encroachment permit that gets filed. And I think that's another step that happens. But as of yesterday, it hasn't gone through. And I wrote as ENNA that we strongly object to them considering changing that road, especially it's a state route and the impact on the beach. I also had an official in their traffic analysis group confirm that it would be the only part of Route 136, which is a pretty long route, that would be one lane, one way. It wouldn't exist anywhere else, and they have some serious concerns about that. And also the cutting it down to one lane.
Just another thing on the
just
traffic.
Before we go on, Diane, I just want to say one other thing, because people were concerned with the emergency vehicles and everything. So we did go to the fire department, and they have confirmed that, like, within inches, the single roadway meets the minimum requirement for emergency vehicles.
Okay. And I just want to clarify as well from the drawing that I've seen so far. Right now, currently, there's a cutout, I guess you call it, an entry into the bank parking lot, and then there's an exit. So there's two. And I just want to clarify: was there only one now? And it looked like it was going to happen pretty much at the split for the beach or around.
And it's really, and it's at the split. It's the only curb cut. In fact, generally, it's kind of funny because generally ENNA is in support of reducing curb cuts because they cut back on traffic issues and safety issues, but they've removed all three, the other two curb cuts there. It's the only one. One
so
of
that'll
the
be the entrance.
modifications
That'll be the entrance and the exit.
I'm sorry, say again.
That'll be the entrance and the exit. That
Yes,
one.
exactly. And so even that turning
Somebody else
radius
needs
there
to
is
mute.
another issue.
It's very loud.
For trucks being able to turn in. And the other thing that we're taking a look at, and it's hard to do this when we don't have experts and money for experts, but when you look at the traffic analysis, they don't really seem to be identifying a line of sight issue for cars coming out of that driveway, where you're now going to have cars parked. By the way, parallel parking there. And I don't know, I mean, we've all been joking about it, but knob walkers aren't the greatest parallel parkers in the world. So we have that. I'll raise my hand right there to myself. But so that's the only curb cut. And something for you to think about, and maybe also, is that if this thing is going to go through, one of the things we considered asking for is, if they're only going to have one curb cut, is to actually move it over to East Avenue. Across from Sweet Ashley's, and have traffic go in and out there. It would certainly be wide enough. I tend to think they would reject that, because then it cuts into the number of units they would have, because the placement of these buildings, don't forget, when TOD went through and the zone changes, the setbacks were all reduced to basically nothing. So it seems more logical to have it on East Avenue, but I doubt they would give up the
Thank you. The one other question was about the points. This is a separate issue, but the bonus points, they call them bonus, I guess. And the bonus, as I understood, is what allows them to have more units. So from the list I saw tonight, it looked like the public access to the water, which appears to be that boardwalk, That seemed to be the highest number of points. It looked like 5 points. I don't, anything else I think I saw was 3. So they're getting 5 points for that. And to Alex Knopp's comments, it's probably not going to be mostly the public using it, but also it seems to be in conflict to me of, I think it was on the 13 points somewhere about the impact on the environment and marshlands. So those two just seem to,
Right.
they're going to get 5 bonus points, but it seems to me that they're having a huge impact on that marsh. And I'm probably talking to the choir here, but many of you who drive by there know that that's a habitat for swans. They have their nest on that little peninsula. There's red-winged blackbirds. And if they put that walkway over there, I'm sure they'll be disrupting the marsh. And they've spent decades trying to clean up that area. And they're going to be putting, cement pylons in there, disrupting habitat, disrupting the marsh.
Right.
And then people will walk out there and throw trash and feed food to the wild
Right.
animals.
Yeah.
And I don't see how those two go together.
Yeah.
You're getting 5
there's
bonus
actually
points for something that's impacting the environment negatively. So
Right. And those bonus points, I think, relate more to the public access walkway and down what they're calling the grand staircase that takes you down to the water. It's kind of delineated from what I think you're talking about, where the pier that's never going to happen. Where that little boardwalk thing that juts out. The DEEP has already said, well, they've told me never going to happen. But the 5 points, I think, are related to just having, they must have water access, by the way. So that's indisputable. And then how they manipulate that on the property is what they did with that walkway and the staircase that goes down. I think that's only the part of the 5 points there. It can't include anything else because that pier is not part of their property. They would just be granting an easement for access to construct it and for public access. And they also are not suggesting that they would fund it or maintain it or anything. And that's why we dubbed it the pipe dream early on. The other consideration, though, is they're suggesting, and the city is suggesting, that they take the land that's at the end of Fenwick and convert that into a public park area. The dead end Fenwick that comes right up to the back of the bank, literally. So that's another concern that we have. I just wanted to throw that in there. It's a long list. Thanks, Diane.
Diane, Liz has her hand raised next.
Oh, I might have hit the wrong button.
Oh, there you go. Okay, we can hear you now.
Yep. Okay, you can hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Great. All right. So, to Diane's point that she was just making about the marshlands over there, etc. I pulled the field card on the property, and this property is still designated as, wetlands, etc., because a big portion of it back there is. And I have some very clear and constructive things that hopefully I'll be able to attend the public hearing, which it looks like so far I can do that. I can get that night. But I had a couple of concerns regarding, reports that I sent to you, Diane, for the abatement study. And also, some other things that I've, unearthed over here, regarding, and what I can't find, which is very interesting at Town Hall, is the original permits and constructions from Merchants Bank in the early 1970s. Because what would be interesting to note is, what is the fill underneath the bank that was put on that property, back in probably anywhere between 1969 and 1971, before that bank building was built. And also to the point of disrupting, as Diane said, the habitat, that's right next to the property, disrupting the sediment that's been running into Mill Pond for years. And could we possibly look, and this is what I'm going to suggest to the commissioners, for an amendment on this, plan before they move forward, that they should be doing both water and air quality tests if they're going to be doing construction on that property. And there also should be some, fish and wildlife conservationists doing testing on the disruption of the habitat over there. And, these are all important, EPA type of arguments that might be able to be made. I know we're all talking about traffic, et cetera. I completely agree on all that as well. But these are other components that oftentimes, if you want to, get political about a subject, you start talking about, oh, the water could be contaminated, et cetera, from fill that was put there, in the 1970s. Who knows? And who knows what kind of sediment you might be unearthing by constructing on that property, based on everything that flowed down that river when they closed off Mill Pond to the harbor. Who knows what kind of contaminants are underneath there? Right. And you unearth that on the residents, then you have a real argument to make, potentially.
Right. Yeah, and the question came up recently too about what type of testing had been done in the past, and what type of testing had been done in conjunction with potential development there, including the soil testing. It would be great, I think, too, if because I can't recall, and I do want to thank you. I didn't want to name names earlier, Liz, but thank you
right.
for the good work you're doing in the background with that research. I know it's tedious but it's really important. Is to ask those questions now, even of both the zoning staff, but also Alexis Karakides, who is the conservation and inland wetlands officer for the city. Our concern, you guys might recall from a meeting or two ago, is that they issued the permit as minor impact, because it's incredible to think, but if you look at Mill Pond and you look at where it butts up against that property, there literally is only a sliver that's designated as inland wetlands. And so when she looks at the map, and the DEEP looks at the map, and they determine how many feet away a development can be from that. This is where Alex can attest to the fact that these guys know what they're doing. They're literally within feet of that. So they meet all the regulations in terms of the wetlands, but it still doesn't speak to the potential environmental issue of what's going to happen, not only during construction, but long-term, with the swan nest there, with, habitat for nesting, breeding. And we've only just now started to look at the impact on migration. Nationally, there's a big effort underway to control, nighttime lighting and rooftop mechanicals and things. And that is a migration path, obviously, at the pond. So,
absolutely.
But I think it would be helpful, Liz, if you could, is to actually, send those questions in and, see what kind of response.
Yeah, I already have communicated with Steve Kleppen, and I said that I'll probably show up in person, but I will send him the materials that I want the commissioners to review prior to the hearing.
Right.
And there's a couple holes in my research, like I said, and I don't know why I can't find certain documents. But also, Diane, if you would send me, you said Alexis, Alexander.
Yes. I will send it to you.
Send me her email. You have my email address.
Yes.
And I will look into that.
Will do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So the next hand up is from Ben Hanpeter. I can't quite tell. And we also have an interesting question in chat just before we go to him. Somebody had asked here, has anyone contacted EPA agencies already?
I'm not aware if any, because residents are also working on this. I'm not aware of anyone who's reached out to the EPA directly at this point. I think the field office is Boston, but I've been in communication with the DEEP, just the Connecticut Environmental Protection. And there's three different groups. There's three different divisions under DEEP that would have some purview one way or another related to this.
Okay.
And some things they don't actually see until it's approved by the city and the applicants apply for specific permits. ENNA has asked them to evaluate this application ahead of it. In fact, it was the DEEP that confirmed for us Alexa Karakides' determination of that inland wetlands line. It's not that we didn't trust her, but we just thought it'd be good to have another set of eyes on there.
So I think before we go to Ben in just 1 second, it would be good if we just sort of know what should we do regarding EPA? Should somebody here be reaching out? Should somebody want to take that up in our who's on this call. I think we got 47 people.
Well, yeah, I mean, if somebody wants to raise their hand and volunteer, that would be great. And I don't want to put Liz back on the spot, but maybe add it to the list of questions going back into City Hall of, that may be possible, or if someone else wants to raise their hand and do some outreach there.
I'll look in the chat and see if anybody pings back. In the meantime,
Thanks.
Ben Harpeter,
Okay.
I don't know how to say it, but he's got his hand up.
And Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Diane.
Hi, Ben.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I just had a quick question. The ecological argument that the building will have an impact on the wetlands, does that bolster the argument to scale it back or eliminate it entirely? Because the way I see it, if you're building 2.5 stories or 3.5 stories, you're still pouring a whole foundation. You're still doing a lot of the same stuff regardless. So I see the impact as kind of the same either way. So I don't know if that necessarily helps your case for scaling it back, and would maybe lend itself more to a full elimination, which, as you've said, is not going to happen. Just curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I mean, ideally, and I think people's first reaction was, not to have anything there that would be this, have this amount of impact. Although it's interesting, Ben, because some of the original conversations when we were talking about TOD and that parcel, it was one of the 5 parcels we were most concerned with. A lot of people started off by saying that would be a great location for a grocery store. And when you think about that and the potential impact right there, at the Mill Pond, I didn't really want to even go there. But I do think that in terms of scaling it back in both the placement and the height would have somewhat of a different impact there. 3.5 stories, 2.5 stories is, could make a big difference in terms of, the migration and, whatever the, other impact the looming building would have over it. But it would also have an opportunity, I think, to actually move it further away than just the bare minimum that they have now, to keep it away from the pond. But the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that for them to be able to fit the required amount of parking on this parcel, that parking is going to be primarily under the building, versus surface parking. And so that's another impact that, that it could potentially have, is because all of those cars then are going to be moving in and out on the pond side. So it is a good question and something to consider. But I think anything that can be done to mitigate the impact on the environment there would be good. And I think a smaller, shorter development, would have at least maybe some impact. Certainly not the impact of not having, anything there, or something smaller in a way. I hope that answers your question. But
Yeah, I just think that maybe if you have something a little bit more concrete, you might be able to get a better foothold with the commission on that one.
Mm-hmm. And I think some of that would come into if we do get to the point of the commission considering modifications, and if the applicants are willing to discuss modifications, then that could be something that really, then it, that could be the basis for saying, it's not going to be 77 units, it's going to be a different number of units, and something smaller and a different layout.
All right. Yeah, I just thought it's an interesting point to consider.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
We have another
question that's come up too is, what difference does it make if it's that one big looming building or if it's multiple buildings and it's the same size? If they actually split that into 3 or 4 type of village type structures, it would actually still preserve the view from Cemetery Street to the trees and to Mill Pond. And so, it wouldn't necessarily change, that many in terms of the number of units, but it would definitely change the, the visual impact of what this development could have. Okay, Sarah, I'm sorry.
Question in chat that someone has asked here. which is came from Tracy Barclay. Do we have any input or support from our District C Common Council members?
Well, good question. So that would be John Kites and Jennifer McMurray. And we, and whichever, maybe Alex could jump in here again for us, but there are state regulations that dictate, I guess, the involvement of elected officials in influencing zoning decisions. And my understanding has been it's just, kind of really the people that appoint those commissioners. But for some reason in Norwalk, they tend to prohibit the common council people from speaking to zoning applications. We have always contended that they are welcome to speak as private residents, especially the ones who live in the zone. So Jen McMurray, we know, we haven't heard anything from John Kites. I'll just put that out on the table. And we haven't seen any correspondence from him that relates to him communicating with the city. Jen McMurray, we know, has been working in the background and communicating with Steve Kleppen, expressing the concerns of the community, and then getting his feedback, which is, basically just reiterating, his particular support of the project. Alex, can you answer the question on the legality of whether or not they are allowed to speak as private residents?
I think the answer is yes. I'm giving you my curbstone opinion here. Don't quote me in court. I think it's more difficult. The difficulty I recall from the council, and I raised an objection to a councilman, is when the councilman was an attorney and represented a project before one of the zoning commissioners who he had approved on the council. I thought that was going too far, but in terms of being a resident of the area and expressing an opinion, I'm not aware that that's illegal per se, and I would encourage them to do that. I think that's part of their job, is to protect this neighborhood.
We agree. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm not sure if that answered Tracy's question, but that's where we stand. And I
I'll be
think
glad, Diane,
ENNA will send out another friendly email to both of them and suggest that they do just that again.
And Dan, I'd be glad to contact John Kites and ask him.
I'm sorry, say again, Alex?
I'd be glad to contact John Kites.
Yep.
If
Thank
Jen
you.
is already active, I'd be glad to
Okay.
contact and ask her.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Questions, comments, suggestions? Is there something folks think that as a community we should be doing that you didn't see in the toolkit? Is there something in there that you think we shouldn't be doing? What is the level of commitment in terms of people either writing letters or showing up at the public hearing, either on Zoom or in person?
Scott's got his hand up, and there were a couple of chat comments too. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Nope, I'm done.
It's a great question you asked, though. Who's willing to pick up and do what? But Scott's got his hand up. Scott, good one.
Hey, I'll put my hand back down then. So really quickly, I guess my question, I keep going back to the DOT as being a group that we could potentially influence, and just wondering if we have contact information for folks there, because that's an angle I definitely would like to attack. I like the fact that there is diversity of what different people are concerned about. Like Diane Cano, I live off of Old Saugatuck over on Pine Hill, and I'm just imagining the nightmare commute, and I can't even imagine what the poor folks either on her street or over on Fenwick will have to deal with as far as noise, light pollution, you name it. That, I'm not against the development there in general, but the fact that it's the density and it's the traffic adds the traffic element by basically the city giving away a lane of traffic to a developer so that they can make more money is mind-boggling to me. And so I'd like to reach out to the DOT.
Can I just clarify, Dan, for what Scott has just said, that generally these decisions end up often in something called the State Traffic Commission, which is the entity that the state sets up to approve finally traffic issues involving large developments. So the DOT reports to the State Traffic Commission. The DOT commissioner, along with others, is a member. I think it's a 3-member State Traffic Commission. I think it's a DOT, what used to be the Department of Environmental Protection, and the Commissioner of Transportation, maybe something like that. They have, as a matter of right, jurisdiction over large developments, which has a minimum number of it's either car trips or road trips on a state road. I'm not sure this would qualify, but even if they have discretionary jurisdiction rather than as a matter of right jurisdiction due to the impact, it still might be worth at some point, sort of appealing to their concerns about these changes to a state highway. I think what you've said earlier, Diane, about this, or somebody, but the only place where 136 becomes one lane, one way, is the kind of issue that might attract their discretionary interest. But it's called the State Traffic Commission, and it was set up to resolve these issues so that the DOT did not have the sole voice in making a decision.
Gotcha. Thank you.
But Judy, before we go to, I just want to address that too with the DOT. We've been in communication with a number of them, and we actually have a pending or in progress Freedom of Information request right now to get all the communications regarding this. Earlier on in the meeting, I was telling you how confusing it is. We're trying to figure out, who exactly was requesting this, who's reviewing it, etc. And so finally, we just cut through the chase. They sent some information back, but it's not fully compliant yet. And so and of course, the state attorney gets involved. And so we're awaiting more information from the DOT on that now. I do want to say, and Alex will recognize this, that they would have been required to do a very heavy analytical work there as something called a major traffic generator. You guys will remember that was a consideration of the Norton project. But what the developer did was they, when they put together this plan, they made sure that it fell just under the threshold that would require the major traffic generator. It's at the 100,000 square feet mark, and for usage, I forget which square foot one it is, but they come in at, I think, 9,980 or something. I mean, just ridiculously close. And the other thing that would have triggered it is 200 parking spaces, but it didn't meet that threshold. But they were sure, and that's another interesting point there too, because I think I'm not saying any kind of weirdo math or anything, but I think differing engineers might have a different opinion on whether they're at the 99,980 or whatever that number is, or if they're actually over it. But so the DOT is only evaluating this to the level of what their normal review is, but we're certainly in contact with them, and hadn't gone, Alex, to the level of the STC, but it hadn't occurred to me while I was still working with the field folks and the different divisions. But if you're suggesting that I do that, I'll do it.
Well, those are the criteria you mentioned are the mandatory criteria for approval from the STC.
Mm-hmm.
That they've come in slightly below that might invoke some discretionary jurisdiction. I don't know. I've never studied that. I've only studied the mandatory, and I've tried to reduce when I was a legislator, try to reduce the criteria for getting the STC involved, because there's a required public hearing and an actual vote like an administrative proceeding, but
Okay,
I'm not sure about the discretionary side of it.
thank you. And then the Transportation and Western Council of Government, WestCog, just so folks know too, have signed off on this as well. Sorry, Judy. Sorry. Go ahead.
Let me unmute. All right. I sort of wrote out my concerns. I have a question. Are there going to be any restaurants, do we know, in this? I can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. Yep, I muted myself there. So there is a retail component. There's a couple different retail components, the biggest of which is at the corner that's directly across from Sweet Ashley's. And it is highlighted as retail, but it has been referred to by them and others as potential for a restaurant. And we don't know if it would be a national chain or a franchise or the size of it. So we can probably expect that it would be some sort of a food enterprise. The other interesting thing with that is that one of those public amenities that are, how much of an amenity is it, is that public seating area right across from Sweet Ashley's. The developer in their last presentation to zoning has already suggested that would be shared use with that retail tenant. And so that would automatically suggest food or restaurant.
All right. Well, the reason I asked, I have a twofold thing. There have to be deliveries to the retail establishments. And, that truck traffic, I see how they park in front of the establishments and, sort of wheel, soda and stuff like that in. I don't know. That's going to be difficult with just the one lane of traffic, and I don't know how that's going to be handled. And also, where are patrons of the retail establishment going to park and guests of people in the building? It's totally inadequate. Now, my big concern is that they're going to realize it's inadequate, this city, and try to build some sort of parking structure. To accommodate.
It's not out of the realm of possibility. When TOD was first being studied, the consultants had spent some time taking a look at because of the amount of density they actually want to put in East Norwalk, to have a centralized garage, a multi-level garage in East Norwalk that would be, kind of the feeder for the corridor. They do meet the parking requirements as written in the zone. So unfortunately, again, don't forget that the regulations that were written into this zone basically were, some of them, there's no doubt they were specific to this actual application. There's no doubt, especially where the restaurant is, and some other features that are in there. The patrons presumably are going to use the transient parking in front. That'll be paid parking, and I guess will be enforced through the parking authority. And then they were looking to also put some parking on the East Avenue across from Sweet Ashley's, which would be the northbound side. And Ben can speak to this because he lives there. That's a one-way street after you get past senior moment, but it's one way, shortly after Sweet Ashley's. And so we're not sure what sense that makes. And yes, the trucks are not going to deal with going into that parcel on that turn. When you look at the parking behind the parcel and having to maneuver that, they're going to stop on either East Avenue and that side of it, or they're going to stop on Cemetery, put on their hazard lights, and be partially blocking people to try to get around it. There's no doubt. And don't forget, you have people moving in and moving out all the time. And
Right.
We're not sure the traffic analysis even fairly took into account not only guests, but Uber in and out and food deliveries in and out. And if it's like Amazon Prime delivery at my house, that's a lot of things. So there's a lot of things to be taken into account. And parking is certainly a primary concern. And the idea with transit-oriented development is that it's kind of the chicken or the egg. What comes first? Facilities that you have where people can walk to a lot of things and they don't need to have cars, or people, kind of coming in and don't have cars and then built up around it. But
Hey,
Well-
Diane, I'm sorry. I'm just going to mention, because you're talking about the parking, somebody had mentioned in the chat, and just a moment ago, there's also two other people with their hands up. There were, Jesse JJ says, there were rumbles that the Masonic Lodge property would be a good spot for a parking structure. And I just thought I'd ask if you've heard anything grapevine there.
yes. So you guys, this really goes back a long way, but you may recall that the Masonic Lodge was looking for zoning change on the property that they own. That's kind of that open space right next to them. And so that they could develop that into, I think, to turn it into C residential zoning and have small units of multifamily housing there. And that would also help to fund and grow their operation and to be able to stay there. Just the other day, we heard a rumor that hasn't been confirmed, that they sold the lodge. Now, I don't know if what people heard or what they're thinking is that part of the land that's open that they were looking to get rezoned and sell, or if it's possible that they have sold the entire parcel, including the building. So someone I think would be in the know on that. So I sent them an email this weekend, and they're looking into it. The contact that I had for there, I'm not sure is associated with the organization anymore. Is there anybody on the Zoom who is familiar with whether or not anything has sold and what it is? I mean, and if not, we can certainly, if it's something, that happened more than like last week, we can go to the city and find out, but that will be interesting.
Yes, I just, one general comment. My understanding of the whole reason they developed these zones was to reduce traffic and encourage use of public transportation. That's why it's around public transportation.
Mhm.
And yet the biggest issue here is traffic.
Right.
And I think we all sort of know that all those people that live there will have cars. And people are not necessarily going to have, there's not going to be so much foot traffic coming from the train station to go over there and eat and, shop and then grab their bags and walk home. And that's the reason I'm just making a general comment. I find it odd that we're worrying about all the traffic, which we do have to, but the whole reason they're being allowed to develop along these zones is to use public transportation. So
Right.
It'd be nice somewhere along the way. We know this is going to roll out at some point to have some assurance that, they need to, but we can't do that. Anyway, the other comment is about the sidewalk. Again, going back to that drawing, and I apologize, I haven't fully investigated it, but the drawing appears to have a sidewalk right around the cemetery on the inside of the circle when you're going around. And I just would never, I put this in the chat. I just would never personally walk on that sidewalk. I just can't imagine the traffic going around the loop and feeling safe on a sidewalk on that inner loop, with, the visibility around the corners and such. And I don't understand where you'd get off of that loop on the inner loop. There'd have to be crosswalks somewhere around too, which I saw on the rendition. And I unless those are little bridges over the street, that's going to be a snafu with traffic or safety for pedestrians and traffic alike. And one final comment about the traffic survey. I don't know how far it branches out from the actual lot, but as someone pointed out, I think it's Fenwick Street, that the dead end behind the bank lot. They sit there forever just trying to get out of their street. So I don't know. I don't know how this is going to, it's just going to be more traffic in general. And that I don't know if the traffic study fans out far enough to include that street, because it's definitely going to be impacted.
Yeah, I'd actually have to take a look at that. We did make sure that they went further, north enough and not cut it off with the impact on, Winfield and going beyond the bridge. There is some debate going back and forth between me and Steve Kleppen that I need to clarify about. They were supposed to take into account the impact of Brim and Crown at this point. and originally reported that those numbers weren't available. But of course they would have to be. So it's something we have to look into. In terms of that sidewalk, I mean, I used to walk down that area all the time and like to the beach and back. And there were many times like where I really just wanted to walk around the cemetery itself and like loop back over to where we should have amenities in the shopping center there. So I think that could probably go either way. I would be concerned about the safety issue, but it's hard to see in those drawings, but it does. And I wish they were clearer, not with all the, with all the engineered stuff on it. But there are some portions there where the crosswalks, it appears to be that they're making significant safety improvements with the crosswalks, and that's a good thing. Because whenever I did walk down there, anybody that walks in that area will know, that it's not that great. So the improvement of the sidewalks themselves and the crosswalks, I think are going to help there.
Okay. Thank you.
In terms of the traffic as well, people have already pointed out, and it'll certainly be pointed out to the commissioners and to Steve, that we think there's a fundamental flaw in the traffic study to begin with, because their traffic counts were done in March. And while they admit that they did the counts while school was in session, which is super important, March is certainly not the height of traffic in that area. There would be the summer months. And so we think those counts are inadequate. And they've also defined peak traffic without taking into account. One of the things the commission looks at is prior use or existing use, and then as of right use. Well, the hours that bank operated were outside of peak hours for commuters. The bank didn't open until, 9 o'clock in the morning, and then the bank closed at 5 o'clock. And when you look at what's real peak commute time, it doesn't correspond with commuters. So we think that's flawed as well in terms of them being able to compare to what the prior use was. It's not apples and apples from that point of view.
Thanks, Diane, for everything, your organization. And I just want to say maybe Alex needs to run for mayor again. But my question is directly related to the traffic, and it's a clarification for previous ENNA meetings we've had over the years. In conjunction with the lowering of the East Avenue viaduct under the railroad bridge, it was my understanding that was being lowered to accommodate semi-tractor trailers that were going to be traveling through South Norwalk on Washington Street through Van Zant, which is the major, I guess the most obvious path through East Norwalk to get onto exit 16. Van Zant, of course, brings you into this cemetery road. I cannot see, and like some people pointed out, I don't know, I travel back and forth probably 8 times from my house down on Cove to Norwalk High School and the train station every single day, 7 days a week. And the amount of times I've been backed up by, like somebody said, delivery in front of the gas station when the Gatorade truck is there, and they don't bother pulling into the gas stations. They just park right on Winfield. So we're going to have an expected increase of semi-trailer traffic coming on Van Zant Street, in addition to this building, is blowing my freaking head apart. As somebody who can't even get out of, I want to go visit my friend who lives off of, not too far from you, in the late afternoon or early evening, on a summer evening. It takes me 10 or 15 minutes. I end up going up Strawberry Hill, come down Myrtle Street, go up East Avenue, and then right on her one-way street, Raymond, because I can't get out of you can't get up East Avenue. So now we're going to add semi-trailers. They've, like you said, haven't done the traffic study during summer beach traffic, prime. And that runs from sunset to 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night. We can be backed up from where most of us who are on this call live. It's just a disaster. So is it not true, I guess long-winded, that the expansion of the East Avenue underneath the railroad bridge was to accommodate those semi-trailers, to make the thoroughfare for them from South Norwalk easier on Van Zant, around the cemetery, and up to exit 16?
So, well, what ended up happening was there, and without going into the long history of it, the original part of like the reconstruction and the maintenance of that bridge had only to do with the Metro North New Haven line catenary work that was being done on the whole line. And in conjunction with that, they were planning on doing some improvements to the commuter experience and to the bridges. Also do maintenance that was sorely needed. What ended up happening in East Norwalk was they needed to address the flooding underneath, for one thing. But at the same time, they were looking to be able to raise the bridge or lower the road to what the state standards are for these bridges, which is the 14 feet versus the 11.2. And so the state decided that the East Avenue Bridge, that their standards dictate that if they're doing that type of work on a bridge, that then they must construct it to conform to the new height. So it's a question of what came first then. Did it come first that then the bridge was going to be 14 feet and then, now tractor trailers can fit under there? And then don't forget, when they go to South Norwalk, there's only a couple different ways that they can get under there. And they can't get it to anywhere in Westport, going eastbound. But so ENNA and other groups put up a good fight back then to try to convince the state and the city not to allow that bridge to be raised to the 14 feet for tractor trailers, and to adhere to what they had in other bridges. And sadly, we lost that battle. Who didn't lose that battle was Darien. So if you look at the bridge at Darien at the train station, tractor trailers can't get under that bridge. And so when we talk about inequity and injustice, that's one of the examples we hold up all the time. In fact, they went to as far as enforcing, having to put signs all over Darien, including the highway, to alert truckers that they can't get under that bridge on the Post Road in Darien. And you can imagine how much truck traffic that is compared to East Norwalk. So I guess that's another chicken or the egg, Tracy. But what started that in terms of that height had to do with the state DOT regulations for the bridge heights, and not necessarily the tractor trailer. But as a result of that, it does create a cut through. When I-95 is completely backed up in the morning, or accidents or construction, the path of least resistance would, certainly be to get off at 16 if you're heading, to 136 or, down that way, and you can get off and then cut through East Norwalk to Van Zant, where you wouldn't, you would have to do the Fort Point turn before.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment backtracking on the parking thing, and feel free to stop me if I'm getting too off the path here. But does ENNA have any official viewpoints about parking minimums? Because there's a lot you could say about how parking availability is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you give people parking, they are incentivized to drive and go use the parking. So you could imagine a case where maybe if Norwalk didn't have parking minimums, maybe the developer would choose to have fewer parking spaces, maybe a lot fewer parking spaces. And then you would probably get some residents that wouldn't own a car at all, and you'd actually reduce the amount of traffic impact that the development is generating. I can definitely see how there would be some spillover on neighboring streets, but I think that that's probably going to happen regardless of how much parking you have. And there's only a certain quantity of spillover that can happen before all the streets around here are full. And I think that that fixed quantity is going to be reached regardless of whether there's 100 spots of on-site parking or 20 or 0. So I'd just be curious to get your thoughts on that. Yeah.
So two things. We don't have an official position statement on that, but we have a position on it, and it's kind of threefold. One is, and a little offline of that, we are major proponents of residential parking permits. There are pockets within East Norwalk, in fact, all over Norwalk, where it's virtually impossible for residents to be able to park. And so we are proponents of the city looking at specific areas and granting residential parking permits in those areas. That's number one. Number two, we're proponents of properties providing their necessary parking. And that's where the debate gets in, Ben, as to how much they should provide for their use. But whatever is necessary for their use, we think should be contained on their own site. And so that answers most of the question. The problem comes in when you have continuous reduction in parking minimums, and you know that what you're trying to do is you're trying to influence behavior by having regulations. And we could that's probably a saloon tale, as we like to say. That's a long, conversation, and I think it would be an excellent conversation to have. But I would say, no, we don't have a position on that. And I would just say personally, I'm not sure if that's the route to go, because to influence behavior by regulation generally takes a long, long time for those things to change. And in the meantime, parking and all the angst of, circling and looking for parking and inadequate parking, all that goes with that, I think, is really detrimental in the community. The other thing that's interesting too is I was once a small business owner, and I've looked at the parking and congestion thing from a few ways. And I, as a consumer as well, I tend not to patronize the places where I can't easily park. And so that's just me as a consumer, and as a small business owner, I always felt it was important that the convenience of parking be something that's that gets offered. So and then in terms of congestion, a lot of people will often say oh, the businesses are going to go nuts with all the congestion and what's it going to do to them. But in fact, there are certain types of businesses that welcome congestion, because every car that either is slowed down or stopped is an opportunity for them to see and know about a business. So even that's an interesting conversation with it. But I think in terms of the parking minimums, I do think it's back to that chicken or egg again. I understand the school of thought that says, if you're giving people to park, places to park, it's not going to do anything to reduce the dependency on cars. And I think if you live in a major city or a type of community where you have very robust, convenient, inexpensive, reliable, and safe mass transportation, it's not a conversation. But when you're talking about, within Norwalk, to just, to get to grocery stores or to or even, anywhere within Fairfield County, I mean, you still would rely upon a car, whether that's, your own car or it's Uber or some other means.
Well, you certainly have
Train
to.
Station alone.
But maybe we can work towards something a little different. It'd be really awesome to see all 46 of us in this meeting agitating for more funding to NTD for more buses.
Yeah, I would be a proponent of that. And and also just hop on, hop off. When we were going through the master plan and everything, we, in addition to on demand, we also thought that we're a great community, if not all year, but certainly seasonal, to have a hop on, hop off trolley. throughout, like a circular as well. I mean, there's all kinds of really creative ways that we can look around moving people. And we would be proponents of the theory of, the 15-minute community as well. And
Yeah.
certainly here in East Norwalk.
Yeah, for sure. I know that I've said this to you, but maybe for some other people on the call, like I support this project, the Mill Pond project, because I see this type of housing as a foundational element to a 15-minute city, like what you just mentioned. I know there's sort of a chicken or the egg problem, like infrastructure or housing first, but I don't think you can wait for one or the other to be fully done. You gotta start pushing forward.
Yeah.
So to me,
I know the premise there is the other chicken or egg is if you don't have enough people to support the businesses, that would make this a livable, walkable, 15-minute to everything you need community, then those businesses won't come. And then, you also look then at, the flip side of it, that you could have a whole ton of people here and they all still end up with cars. I want to say another thing in terms of the points that ENNA is looking at. And Ben, I always respect your opinion on this, and you know that. But one of our concerns is that if this development gets approved as is, it will become the blueprint for the other development in the corridor. And so, now you're looking at not just the Mill Pond development, and I've discussed this with other people. I don't think there's a legal rationale for the zoning commission to deny a subsequent application coming in after this one. And that's why it's so important for us to get this first one right and define the rules that this community wants these developments to go in under. It's unfortunate that we couldn't change it in the zoning when we tried to do that. But we can certainly take advantage of both the special permit standards and the honest and fair and thorough evaluation of these, I'll use my air quotes, public amenity bonus points. And I think that's where we need to get it right. And if we don't get it right, I think the overdevelopment that we feared and that even the consultants originally warned about, is going to come to fruition.
So Diane, just want to mention, because I know we're getting up to 2-hour mark. Alex has his hand up. I think Ben did before. I want to make sure that, starting to see, we're getting near time here. Just that you get a little time at the end to sort of say what you would want us to do as follow-ups. But Alex has his hand up right now.
Yeah,
Okay,
just
and
very,
go ahead, Alex.
yeah, just very briefly, I mean, to me, the theme of what the sort of general theme of dealing with this, at least the one that I think appropriate that I will use, is that you can't use a one-size-fits-all approach to come to a decision about a particular development. I happen to think transit-oriented development is generally a good idea.
Mhm.
The problem here is that we're in a almost a sort of a peninsula situation in East Norwalk, and we have the beach and other general citywide amenities to deal with. And therefore, we have to look at this particular proposal differently than we would somewhere else in the city. And so I don't think we have to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater here. And even if TOD is a valid concept generally for planning, in this case, it has to be significantly modified to work. And that's the approach I'm going to be taking. And I think should give all of us a license to bring out our personal experiences about traffic, about pedestrian safety, about the Mill Pond and all these other things, without in any way having to negate a general proposition that this P&Z has bought into. And again, thank you, Diane, for all of your excellent work.
You're welcome. And, and I'll add to that too, not only do we generally support the concepts of TOD, it's ironic in that ENNA was one of the major proponents about getting the city to apply for the TOD grant study that started all of this. So we actually partnered with the 3rd taxing district to say, let's team up and get the city going on it. So because of all the fundamental tenets of what we expected TOD to be here. And so, so back to Sarah for a second. So I think I can go back to, let me go back and share my screen, because basically when you say people looking for the next steps here, hang on one second, let me just go back. Because basically what's going to happen is we'll be, the next things are really all of the components that I talked about in terms of the toolkit, in terms of communicating, and then showing up at the public hearing. It's important, and especially in light of what Alex just said as well, for people to be able to relate their personal experiences here of living in East Norwalk or working in East Norwalk, and what this development's impact could be, what their concerns are, what they're hoping it could be, and that's important. So the next steps really are, let me just get to this slide again here with the scale it
In
back.
case somebody doesn't get a screenshot of this or something like that, is there information like this in the last email perhaps, or?
There's a few of these components in the past few emails,
Okay.
but I can actually email this out tonight so that people will see this, and they can also see not the draft yet of the letters, but they'll get an understanding of what the letters would be, and then what the approach would be at the public hearing. The only reason why I'm hesitant to talking about the public hearing at this point is because we're not quite sure yet in terms of being able to engage consultants and legal folks and consultants or experts in terms of working with or representing ENNA at the public hearing. So I'm only really not speaking to how we envision that going, but I can just speak in general to say what ends up happening so that folks know is the applicants are going to first make a presentation of their plan. And sometimes that's condensed because the feeling of the commission is that they've already seen this plan since last July. In fact, the commission chair at the last meeting said, the public should be well versed in this because there's already been 20 meetings on it. But I think if I asked, all of you in this room tonight to raise your hand and say, how many of those zoning meetings did you sit through or go back and watch a video on, it may be actually a couple people. So in that regard, they may or may not give a full presentation. And then what will happen is they will actually open up the actual or the legal public hearing and give the public an opportunity to speak to the application. And they will, there's no time limit, but they will ask folks to be as concise as they can be and to try not to be repetitive. Although, if you feel strongly about something that someone has also already said, we do encourage you to repeat it. It's not enough to say what she said, or I agree with what Joseph said, especially if Joseph spoke, 20 people before you. So we don't want people to be intimidated by that. And then once all the public has had an opportunity to speak, and anyone who is an expert, would identify themselves. The applicant and the city staff has an opportunity to rebut. And they'll do that in the form of, they can also answer questions that are raised from the public, but there's no public dialogue between the public and the applicants, the public and city staff, or the public and the commission. You get one chance to speak and that's it. And if you're answering questions, the expectation is that in the rebuttal, they will address those questions, but you can't do any kind of a follow-up. And then following their presentation, It could be that the public hearing gets continued. If not, all the public has had an opportunity to speak and it gets late in the evening. Or if a lot of new information and questions were raised, the commission could send city staff and the applicants back to get further information, in which case the public hearing would be held open. If the public hearing is held open, then those who didn't have an opportunity to speak the first time will have an opportunity to be heard. And those who did speak the first time can actually speak again, but only in reference to new information that was introduced after they first spoke. And then the final step, which can happen in the same night, believe it or not, is that there will have already been a pre-prepared resolution for the commission to approve this application. And it could happen that before the end of the evening that they will actually take a vote and approve it. Just to give folks a sense of how that's going to go. And I do want to stress too that there's nothing that no one should feel like, oh, I'm not sure if I should be doing something or calling someone or asking for something or requesting information or communicating with Steve Kleppen and city staff because, ENNA is working with us and giving us information. We really can only do so much. When we say ENNA, we are a small volunteer board that all works full time. And so we encourage people in addition to what we're doing and sharing information and educating folks, on how to be informed and engaged here, that you do go ahead. And if you have, specific questions, you can send those right into city staff and to the state agencies as well. Okay, did anyone have any, I just want to feel like I'm not, kind of sidestepping if people aren't clear of what's going to happen like over the next, few days and then up to March 2nd to the public hearing. And also I can say too that there is a possibility that we may still look to be able to stop this time clock with what's called an intervention, and then be able to get some legal expertise and some professionals who can do the analysis that we need relative to the environment and traffic, and the impact on the community. But I would say at this point that everyone should go ahead and assume that it's definitely March 2nd at 6 p.m. And then I would encourage people to the level that you're comfortable doing so, that it would be helpful for as many people to show up at City Hall as possible, but for as many people to participate via Zoom or in person, pro and con. We always encourage the public to speak up, whether you're for this or against it, or just have questions, or if you have suggestions you want to share as well.
Scott Goodwin has his hand up.
Hey, Diane, just a quick question based on what something you just said that it jogged my memory. So does it make a difference if we not only write letters but also show up, or do they count that as redundant noise? Like I feel like in the past they've written us off as there's just a handful of troublemakers out there making noise against whatever, and so just push it on through.
Yeah, I can't say that that's not likely to happen, because, well, a few things. One, because as I've already said, the regulations were written, basically to the T for this parcel, based on observing all of the zoning commission meetings on this and the nature of their questions, and considering the fact that at least 9 of the, sitting members are people that originally approved the TOD and the EBTZ zone, that you take that into consideration when they view the public comment. However, I do think it's important that even if you submit written comment, that you show up and if you can show up and speak. And I'll speak to that by saying that you can say, I submitted written comment for the record. I hope that you all had a chance to read it. And I would also like to point out several points from that that I think are relevant, that I would like on this record and for my fellow residents to hear as well. That's totally appropriate to do.
Right.
Another thing that would normally happen, so let's say there's a bunch of people there. There are lots of people who feel strongly about this, but are not compelled to get up and speak. And I completely get that personally. I'll just leave it at that. And so often what we'll do, and the commissions allow us to do this, is at some point, one of us from ENNA will ask for a show of hands of people who are concerned with this development and want to see it modified and, you know, considered for modification before it gets approved. And then people can raise their hands, which is also good. And I think I'm not sure if there's a zoning commissioner on here right now. I think I saw her bop in before, but for every one hand that goes up when you're sitting in the council chambers, maybe Alex can attest to this. When you see 10 hands go up, when you're sitting there, it looks like 20. So, there you go. So, you know, it's pretty powerful. Another thing people can do is bring, you know, signs, but they may discourage that because they don't want to have any interruptions. And we would certainly not endorse any outbursts or any, you know, display of, you know, anything less than, you know, professional from.
I will mention something else about speaking up, which I also am hesitant to do, but sometimes it's just necessary, is that if there is press coverage, let's say you wrote a letter in to, you know, whoever at City Hall, and you're going to stand up and say, I hope you had a chance to read my letter and take it into consideration. That moment to be able to say something out loud, well, if it gets covered by the hour or something else like that, it helps to have more information out there about how the public feels, pro or con, but just how the public feels.
Right.
And those things sometimes get covered if you speak in a public hearing.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And if we do go to do any kind of a sidewalk, you know, demonstration, for lack of a better word, we would, just like with Norton, we would certainly invite the press and have a little bit of a press conference with ENNA, but it's just mostly so that it's, you know, visible, and it's just another way for the, you know, for the community to display their concern. You know, I think that's probably the best word at this point. All right, so I will say this again, just like the past couple of meetings. If you're hanging on because you think that there's something super important that you're waiting to hear, raise your hand so I can see you now. And if there is something, you know, now that I say or we talk about that's super important and a bunch of folks have dropped off, I will certainly get that into an email, but I don't want people to feel like they need to stay on at this hour because of that. But then I will add, like, I will just say that I am willing to, for the folks that do want to stay on, that want to have a further discussion or questions or have some suggestions or anything, I will stay on until no one else, you know, raises their hand and wants to chat within reason. It shouldn't get to be breakfast. I'll put it that way.
So I will give you the kind of marker of what I see here as your co-host.
Okay.
We went from, I think, almost 50 people to now I think it's 27 people are dropping off. Alex has just made a nice comment. I don't know if you can see the comments. And then I don't see any other questions in the chat. That's what I was looking for. We did, I think it was Liz said that she didn't see anything about anything as to a pending offer or sale for Masonic Lodge. So there's something in the chat there. And that's, you know, we're kind of at the 2 hour, and I can tell you that right now I don't see any other chat or hands up. So.
Okay, so we'll do last call. And we'll just, remind people to, keep on doing what you're doing. Don't assume, oh, someone else is writing letters and I don't need to do that. So if you have an opinion, question, concern, or suggestion, continue communicating with us, but also with the city. If anybody still needs a sign, I will get kind of a final count on what we have on those. And Alex, I'll be sure that you get one. I'm sorry I missed that there. And you can always write into ENNA. It's info@eastnorwalk.org. And we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And at this point, I would just say that there's a possibility that we could hold a meeting on the 28th. If there's, relevant information, or we think that we need to get folks together, but don't feel compelled to have to hold that open at this point. And otherwise, it would be the public hearing, and there'll just be a whole bunch of emails from ENNA at this point. And then our March meeting, which would be the 20th. And whether this is behind us or not, there are some interesting other things that are about to impact East Norwalk. That we'll be talking about in March. So never a dull moment. Okay, last call for hands, questions.
I see one question in chat. It's from Lisa Rogers. What are our options if the commission approves? Can we appeal?
Yes, so appeal is always an option. There's a lot of legalities involved in, first of all, when you can appeal. That's important for folks to know. There is a very short clock from the time that the actual approval gets noticed in the newspaper to the time that you can file an appeal. And I think it's something crazy like 10 days, but I'm not sure if Alex knows that or not, but we can certainly look it up. It's not a lot of time, I don't think, on a zoning approval. Or is that one of the 30-day ones? Do you know, Alex?
I don't recall, but you have to file a notice of appeal within the time period, then you have more time to do the actual appeal.
Exactly, right. So exactly. Thank you so much. So yeah, that time clock first is at the notice of appeal, and then that kind of stops everything. And then, then you have plenty of time to build the case. The thing with appeals is that you have to have the grounds for appeal, and those things can get tricky. But yes, to answer the question in the short form, yes, absolutely. That's a legal recourse. And then I think if you fail on that appeal, then I think it can go to a higher legal authority as well. I would just keep in mind that that any endeavors like that individuals or ENNA looks to undertake would be costly and time consuming. And just want to give people a heads up on that. Not that it wouldn't be done, but it would definitely need some funding as well. Okay. And so if nothing else in chat, and I don't see any other hands up,
I think.
Then, and I see everybody dropping off anyway. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Oh my gosh, before everybody dropped off, I just wanted to say thank you. And we'll be in touch and see folks at the public hearing, and we'll see you in email land. Thanks, everyone.